is the role of the director and what is the director's responsibility in a production? So whoever wants to begin may begin. Thank you, Henry.
Well, I think first and foremost, I think the role is as a collaborator. Collaboration, I think, is so important. And secondly, our role in jump in anytime is to tell the story that the playwright has written. And I've certainly learned the hard way when I'm not doing that as well as I should be, and when I need to ask more questions and learn more and understand more. But my job is to tell a story and tell it clearly and honor the playwright.
And would also add to that, that was great, Elizabeth, that the director is responsible for the overall vision of the production of the show. And as such, working with all its collaborators to bring about that unified vision for the show. Casting it, bringing your team together, that creates space for a wonderful collaboration.
I would agree with both of those statements, and depending on the institution, the theater that you're directing for, that might also then spread out to collaborating with marketing and with education and community programs and all kinds of institutional connections to the production that you're working on.
Here's a history question. You've all been directing for a number of years. This is 2020. Has the role of the director changed in the past 10, 15 years? And if so, how? The role and the responsibility of the director.
I don't think it has.
Okay.
But I'm open. I don't think it has. I think it depends on, as Henry says, the institution where you're working, but the role of the director is still the same to bring about how that institution works. Are you working with an ensemble? Are you working with, how the casting takes place in that particular institution, but you're still working with a team, a production team, designers, actors. So you're collaborating with all of them to bring about, to elicit the best work of that play, bringing that play to life.
Yeah, I think I would agree.
And you mentioned ensemble, and it's one of the aspects that we always look at very carefully. As a director, when you consider your casting choices and you're casting an ensemble, what do you consider? And what is some of the most important aspects in an ensemble that you look for when you're directing? And in order to help us see that, give an example of a play or a past production of yours, doesn't have to be a Chicago one, where that was foremost in your mind. Tough question, I know. And why?
I think every production has different requirements for who that ensemble is. And we all, I think, direct across genres. So if I'm directing an opera versus a musical versus a play, it changes, of course, as far as who I'm looking for and what that ensemble will look like. To be honest, I think one of the biggest things for me anyway, at this point, it's like we want to work with those who are willing to to go anywhere with us and try anything, and you know, and so that's, I love working with people who are adventuresome and fun to work with.
Absolutely. To that, I would add that I've kind of learned sometimes the hard way that I want to work with people that that I can enjoy being in the room with for 5 weeks, 4 weeks, however long, because sometimes the difference between like a brilliant actor and a really good actor who's also a nice person
Is everything.
is everything.
It is everything.
It is everything. And
it is.
I agree with all that. Sometimes they've been very good friends of mine who I know are amazing actors, but they're not necessarily collaborators, and they're not. If I was doing a solo show, that's one thing, but working in an ensemble, you want to work with people who will bring a sense of, as Elizabeth said, a sense of adventure. They're bringing high skills and a willingness to try everything, and they get what it is to be part of an ensemble, that they're looking for the group, they're to mesh with the group. It's like when you're trying to put together a choir, it's a very similar idea, that you want the voices to blend and harmonize. And it's that same thing with actors. You want them to be able to work in concert with one another, and yeah, be willing to try everything to bring their character, but more importantly, the whole production to life.
And and those answers are from your vantage points as directors. So now let me place you in an audience. As an audience members, what criteria do you use to determine that more than just the individual actors giving strong performances, a strong ensemble has been created to create a more unified vision of the production as an audience member?
As an audience member, I think getting caught, that's happening in an ensemble when you are caught up in the story and not necessarily a single performance. There may be things that stand out, but it is the story that's driving. And as directors, that's always it's the text that drives everything. And so how well that group is telling the story, that it's like you want to know what's happening next. It's driving you to the next moment of the play. Every moment drives to the next moment.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I would have said the same thing. And I would add that you believe the story. I think that's part of the same thing, that you're caught up and that you believe. And the more I'm swept away, the more I know that it's a great production.
At times it can feel like a relay race, where no one drops the baton, where it's always the energy just gets handed off from scene to scene to scene, and that the whole ensemble has an energy that just sort of stays sort of suspended, in a good way, not waiting suspended, but like just sort of like lifted.
Right.
And that's what you want.
I'll add, yes. And the other thing I think that I always, when I walk away saying, wow, that was something, is when I'm surprised. When I don't see something, like when you said, carrying the baton from one moment to the next, when I'm surprised by something, I love that. I really do, because that's an exciting moment.
And since you were talking about actors, here's a two-part question. How much space do you allow an actor to create a character? And how do you handle a situation where the actor's interpretation of a character is very different from yours and doesn't seem to get it? Henry, you were the first to smile.
Great. Well, I think that, I mean, that's something that you try to sort of be attuned to in the audition process. I very often will run long in auditions, and it's because when I'm interested in an actor, I will always work with them. And not only that, but I'll also have a conversation with them about something that has nothing to do with the play, you know, just about the world, about their family, about whatever, any little sort of thing that I might see in their resume that I think is interesting or that I might have a connection to, just to get a sense of who they are as people. But it is important for me to work with an actor in an audition situation, because then I get a sense of whether or not they are flexible and willing to compromise. David, what was the first part of that question?
How much space do you allow an actor to create a character?
You know, I think as long as it feels like it is moving in the same direction as the play, as much as they need, because you know, the cool thing about directing and working with good actors is that, you know, they have the answers that you don't. And I really look for that. I look to actors to be my partners. I don't come in with the answers, and I don't come in with a, you know, definitive character choice in mind, you know. If I feel that it's straying way off from the story, then I try to guide them. Then I ask them, you know, about given circumstances, about the world of the play and how their character fits into the world of the play and the story, and, you know, try to guide them back. And when that seems impossible, that's man, that's a tricky and unfortunate situation.
And there's different, and I say yes, I agree with you. And it is that I like to think of myself as painting the broad strokes of that story. And I like to give the actors as much room as they need to create that character, and that we're talking about it in the table work part of our work together before we ever get on our feet, that we are really unlocking what that character is, so that we both are on the same page about what not only the given circumstances, but what is the character after, and trying to find that, how they are starting to tune that character to the rhythm of this of that scene, of the play, of what we are agreeing that on what the playwright is trying to elicit, what is the story telling us. And, you know, so that as they start to develop that character, then we are agreeing through that process together. And yeah, if they veer off, and I'm trying to think of a circumstance where someone veered so far off, because there's different approaches that you can get to, but as long as it's as long as we're able to follow what that character's path, then I can be open to it. But I don't know that I've been unlucky enough to have a character be totally antithetical to what I think the author's intention is.
Mm-hmm.
But I do a lot of new work, so then there's sometimes room for that, because the playwright's in the room with us, and that discovery is happening as a team.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the issue comes when you have an actor who is, you know, gets so dug in to their choices,
Right.
that it becomes about them. One of my favorite, you know, mantras, you know, in teaching acting is that it's not about, and I think it's Meisner, it's not about you, it's about the other person, you know. And I think if you put that in concert with another, you know, great mantra that I think is also Meisner, which is, you know, character is how you do what you do, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can use those two sort of guiding principles, and they still resist, then I'm like, then
Changing direction a little bit. What should a director consider when changing the time frame, location, or cultural background of a play?
Well, I'll jump in real quick with the last part of that question, David, which is, you know, more than ever, I think it's a tricky, you know, it's a dangerous thing when you are changing the cultural background of a play. Then I think then a director needs to be conscious of what their choices are, and they need to be super conscious about who they're telling the story with, right? Otherwise, that's when you fall into the, you know, the dangers of appropriation of culture. And that's, I don't think, something that any of us would want to do. So, you know,
Okay.
beyond that, I'll let my
No, and I agree. I was like, well, I don't know that I would ever want to do that. I want to start with the canvas that in which it was created. So unless a lot of the work I do now, or at least I'm associated with at a theater whose whole mission is adaptation of work, that's one thing. If you're dealing with something that's public domain and you can create that whole world, that's a different thing. Then that is a place where I think the director can make those decisions with whoever is adapting that material. But usually it's the writer that makes that decision. I don't want to step into that realm of changing something for the writer unless that was the intent, or that it's such an open play, or you're reinterpreting something like Shakespeare, or again, public domain, that those things have been done successfully. But I don't believe in stepping into that cultural appropriation. Okay. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
I don't think that should be done.
Elizabeth?
I agree. And I'm trying to think I don't think I've ever changed any of those things. If so, like I'm currently working on an opera that will hopefully be produced in 2022, and we're talking about changing the location, but that is the only reason we're looking at that is because the composer originally wanted it in that location and changed it to a more neutral location because of when the opera was written. Then that is interesting and sort of makes sense to me. But even that, you know, is not, it has to be done, I think, very carefully, with great care.
All right, thank you. The role of technology. You know, technology has certainly changed in the past 5, 10, 15 years. Projections and everything else in that area. How has that changed you as a director, or hasn't it? The use of technology in your directorial efforts.
I've always been interested in it. Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Henry.
please.
Go right ahead.
I've always been interested in using media in stage, and I've seen people do it very, very well. And back when it was considered experimental to do, and I've seen great productions happening, places like the MCA and that kind of thing, where they're using different types of technology. But now we're in a place where we're in COVID, and everybody is pivoting, or at least many of us are pivoting, because we are looking for ways to stay connected with our audiences and delivering material. And we are doing something, we're working in a medium that was not designed for this. So we're not really using film, and we're not using the technology that way. We're trying to discover it as we go. And that's a different, that's a different thing. And it can be exhilarating and exciting, but it's exhausting as well.
But before this pandemic occurred, has technology changed any of your directing? This is to the three of you.
I don't know if it's changed my directing. I've certainly had some fun using some of the newer technology. And I guess what occurs to me is what it has done, especially in the last several years, is, and this isn't directly related to what I create on stage, but it has opened up ways in which I can learn more and see more of what's happening around the world. And that's not, I know that's not really the question you're asking, but being able to even to watch a national theater production, or you know, that sort of thing, has opened up some new worlds for me. So I found that interesting.
You know, I would say, I mean, I agree with both my wonderful colleagues here, and just because I'm, you know, old as dirt, I feel like I've, you know, been there, and now I'm kind of coming around the bend, coming back home. You know, that it can be intoxicating, you know, to employ like the coolest, you know, technology, and sometimes it's really fruitful. But, you know, speaking about this age of COVID, you know, I just went through an experience where I felt like I was back in college and throwing up, you know, doing a production with, you know, like building the sets myself and stuff like that. You know, didn't literally do that, but, you know, without the benefit of a state-of-the-art theater, doing it outside, on a trailer in parks, and it was exhilarating, because it was handing it back to the playwright and to the performer and the audience, and doing the bare minimum to facilitate the meeting of those, you know, constituents of the theater, and it was really rewarding, you know. And I just think that, you know, I keep coming back to Peter Brook, you know, and an empty space. It is that sometimes less is more. And sometimes we can really, you know, I was inspired for, you know, this Fannie Lou Hamer Speak On It by Luis Valdez and Teatro Campesino, and the way they used to, in the 60s, in the early 70s, you know, on the back of a pickup truck, go into the fields of California to educate and entertain the migrant workers, and educate them about their rights to unionize, and the dangers of pesticides. And, you know, it was necessary theater. And it's so cool when you can do theater like that. You know, it doesn't demand any technology.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, I have an individual question for each of you. So this is not something that three of you need to respond to, just each individual one. And I'll say all three questions, so you have a chance to think for a few seconds.
Try to remember them.
No, I'm just going to give you your question, right? Elizabeth, could you please talk about the Directors Lab Chicago? What is it? What are its goals? In the June 4th, 2020 committee statement posted on the lab's website, the lab commits itself to diversifying its membership. How successful have you been? And what suggestions do you have for other arts organizations who have the same goal? Ilesa, what are some of the challenges in directing adaptations? And what are some of the mistakes that some productions make? And Henry, what are some of the methods that schools use or approaches they take in teaching directing? And let's divide that into two parts, maybe before the pandemic and what's going on now. Okay. So Elizabeth, we're back to you. Do you remember the question?
Yes.
Okay.
It had to do with Directors Lab Chicago.
Right. And diversifying.
So I am actually no longer the artistic director of DLC, but on the board, and a huge fan of the labs. So in 2004, can't believe how long ago it was, I attended the Lincoln Center Directors Lab, and then again in 2005, and met a colleague there, Karen Shook, and she and I created the Directors Lab in Chicago. And there wasn't anything quite like that in Chicago at the time. And what it is in short is our lab is a 1-week lab where we invite directors, emerging directors from all over the world to come in and talk about a particular theme. So the theme might be Shakespeare one year, or it might be movement for the stage, or every year was a different theme. It was and continues to be, I think, a very successful way to bring directors together into the same room and talk about their craft and collaborate. And it's rare that directors get to be together. So I think that was probably the most, the biggest thing that we heard over and over again was, it was just so good to be in the room with 30 other directors. Is there another part to that question?
Yeah, the second part was in the June 4th, 2020 committee statement posted on the lab's website. The lab commits itself to diversifying its membership. How successful have you been? And what suggestions do you have for other arts organizations who have the same goal?
Mm-hmm. I think we can always be more successful. I think I could have been more successful, and I think the lab as a whole can be. And I think it's really about getting out there and reaching out to directors from from every community. And so I guess my answer would be we can always do more. We can always do more.
Thank you. Ilesa, the challenges in directing adaptations and some of the mistakes that some productions make, and some of the great things productions do.
I don't know if I can answer the mistakes that some of them make.
Okay.
I don't know that I've seen everything that's been adapted to stage, but I think the challenge is the same, is depending on, again, who's adapted it. Is it telling the story that was it's like trying to cull information from your source material and make and ensure that you've gotten to the central idea and how well you're telling that story and what has to get left out. So some of that has to do just with the depth and breadth of the text or of the story that has been adapted. So I think those are challenges. Is oftentimes it's a large cast. Are people playing multiple roles because to satisfy all the different twists and turns of that? And so really casting a wonderful ensemble of folks who can play multiple roles and be highly flexible. And I think that's where the key to storytelling is that it's can be at its best. And maybe if you've missed something in terms of managing that group, it could be muddled. I've just been fortunate to witness really amazing storytelling with ensembles who have spent years developing the way they adapt those stories and the way they tell them. And so I think it's when you're developing that type of craft, it becomes an easy thing to do. And maybe you can get stuck in a rut. I don't know in terms of the types of stories you tell, but I've seen that work so well because it creates a certain nimbleness in the art itself and the artists who are working on it. Everybody becomes very flexible, very nimble, and just enhances and increases what's in your toolbox as an artist. At its best, I think it does that, and that fans of the books that are being adapted or those stories, to hear people be engrossed and love the fact that their favorite stories have been brought to life is what's on the plus side of that. And I assume on the minus side, you may have folks who say, well, how did you leave this particular thing out? This was something that was important. How could you, right? So that you're making certain choices, and that's usually not directorial. That's usually the playwright making those decisions about what's in or what's out, and how do you best capture it? Or it's the decision that it's been made together, and how do you best tell that? And I feel like I'm starting to ramble, but I think it's just could be the best of times or the worst of times.
Do you find that most playwrights, when they bring you an adaptation, that it's in a manageable time frame, or are they coming with a 4-hour play based on a 700-page book?
Again, in the processes that I've worked in, it's usually because that production company understands how long.
Okay.
They already know that process and how long they're looking to develop it, and workshopping helps you to get there. Usually there's a development process there. So I've not been in a situation where it hasn't had the ability to be developed in a way that you don't have a 4-hour, I didn't get to, I remember this, but I didn't work on Nicholas Nickleby and when they first did those adaptations, for those who remember it.
Yeah.
Sorry, kitten walking past me.
Well, I remember The Grapes of Wrath, an hour and a half was cut the night before opening, from what I've heard. So things happen. Henry, what's going on in the schools?
Well, I hate to disappoint you, David, but I don't and never have taught directing. I teach acting.
I know.
I'm a weird director that way, but I've been very super privileged to have taught at Columbia, at the theater school at DePaul, and now at Northwestern. And my sense of how my great directing colleagues at all three of those, have handled teaching directing in a way that I think is really successful, is primarily through focusing on collaboration, which, is something we started talking about right from the get-go here. And, that can take many forms. That can mean, enabling their students to have a cohort of collaborators that progress along with them, meaning designers, meaning actors, even other directors, but a cohort of collaborators. And also, I know that at Northwestern, I can't speak specifically for the theater school or Columbia in this regard, but I know at Northwestern, they do this really cool thing where they actually have a collaboration class, and they have an established director, professional director, come in and throughout an entire quarter work with this, the students, but literally the students are observing and questioning this director as they collaborate with their designers on a project that they're working on, which I think is a really super cool thing.
It's great.
So they're like at some place like Northwestern, I know that Bob Falls has come in and he's worked with Anna Kuzmanic, who teaches design at Northwestern, and her students are observing her work with Bob, and the directing students are there observing him working with the designer, and it's a really cool thing. And I think it's a great model for the American theater, for any theater, because it is a hands-on, almost a journeyman sort of approach.
And as the three of you know, theater has endured for generations and generations, and each generation has its own artists. So let's look at the current young generation coming out of college now. Do you see a difference in young artists, whether they're actors, technical artists, actors, their point of view, their approach, any different now than maybe 10, 15 years ago in any regard? I mean, society has changed also, and they react to those changes in society.
Absolutely. And I think that's key. I think the students that are coming, the young artists in the field now are super aware of the appropriateness of things. And I think that they're citizen activists, artist activists, you know, they are definitely keyed into what's going on in the world and see their job as very much connected to addressing what is happening in the world today.
And they're not afraid to speak about it, which I love. I mean, I've had the privilege of working at DePaul, and those students. I mean, and I love that I learn from them, probably more than they learn from me. And I love that. I really do. That they're keyed in and they're not afraid to speak about it. And I think that that's important right now.
And I think it's really, I agree. I love the fearlessness and that generationally they just will take more risks
Yes.
to speak out and say what needs to be said. We've just all had different approaches depending on where generation you come out of, but I find it exhilarating in that I'm really proud of these artists now that are out there and wanting to make a difference and a change in the world.
Absolutely.
And they go about it in a different way than we would have had. Not that I think everyone wants to see that, but how you approach it and do it is vastly different. And I applaud these young artists.
And what bit of advice do you have for these forthright artists as they enter the theater world? It can just be one golden nugget.
I always say remain endlessly curious about everything.
Wow, that's awesome.
I love it. I'm stealing it, Elizabeth.
Putting that on my syllabus.
Yeah, I think that the curiosity and sense of don't forget the craft. Stay in love with the craft as well, you know, no matter what else that is happening in the world that you're approaching, your craft is the key as well. So stay curious and in love with the craft.
Thank you. Two personal questions. Can you please share a major decision you made regarding the development of a production? What were the choices? And it doesn't have to be a Chicago production, but you were faced with a decision of going this way or that way regarding the theme or the way production was going to go. And what were some of the choices you made, and why did you make the one you made?
Okay. Well, I'll throw this out there because it's the first one that came to mind, and it's a hard one.
Yes, it is.
But I guess I forget when it was exactly, 2007, 8. At the Goodman, when I was directing The Cook by Eduardo Machado, and it's a play that takes place in Cuba, and it starts in 1959, just as the revolution is happening. And it goes up until the late 80s or mid 80s. And the central character, the cook, is a character named Gladys. And, you know, all the characters are Cuban. Toward the end, and there's a Cuban American who comes into the play. But the central character is an Afro-Cuban, is a Black Cuban woman. And we were casting exclusively from Chicago. And I could not identify an Afro-Latina who I felt really captured the role and could carry the play. It was a huge role. And so I made the decision to cast an African-American actress, Karen Aldridge, who I had worked with at the theater school at DePaul, who I knew to be a remarkable actress, who I felt captured the spirit of this character. And, it was tough personally for me. And there was some pushback from my community about, what the heck, but, as I think Elizabeth was saying, at the beginning, our job is to tell a story. Our job is to honor the story that the playwright has given us. And, the truth is, you guys, playwrights of color don't always get a second chance. You can't always say, well, but the next show in the season is also a Latinx play or an African-American play. So there's a certain, kind of urgency to its success. And I made the choice, and I think it was an excellent choice, if I say so myself, because she is a remarkable actress, and she did exactly what I knew she would. And I was willing to take the hit and the bullet for it. And so that's it.
Yeah. And if you don't want to respond to somebody else, you don't need to. I'm just.
Come on, y'all.
I don't know that I've had anything that tough. So I don't know that I can respond.
Right, no problem, no problem. Believe me, I have plenty of questions. What production by another director stands out in your mind as one of your favorites, and why? And this need not be limited to Chicago.
There's
That's
just so
a tough
many.
question,
There's so
too.
many.
I know that is such a tough question because there are so many. There are
No,
so
I said
many.
one of your favorites. I didn't say your favorite. One of your favorites.
Well, I'll answer in that one of the things, because I have so many people in Chicago whom I admire. But one of the things, going back to the Director's Lab at Lincoln Center, that did for me all those years ago, is remind me again that there is theater outside of Chicago. I feel like I was so focused on Chicago that I forgot that there was an entire world out there, which is why now when I teach, that endlessly curious about everything, not just the theater, everything is so important. And that year, in 2004, the International Theater Festival was happening at the same time at Lincoln Center. And I was able to see productions from all over the world. And it's the first time I was introduced to Simon McBurney's work, who is the artistic director of Theater de la Complicité, or Theater of the Complicit. And I saw one of his productions, The Elephant Vanishes, in 2004. And that, talk about technology, which was used tenfold. That really, it was something so incredibly different. I'd not seen that kind of thing on stage before. So that's an example outside of Chicago.
Yeah. I hate to not.
No problem. I can move right along.
Appreciate our colleagues here at home, but I would have to say this, similarly for me, it was maybe some of you saw it in the Latino Theater Festival, but Marta Carrasco from Barcelona, when the first time I saw her perform, her company, I was blown away, because that sort of visceral performance, and the same is true of Teatro Buen Día of Cuba when I first saw them, and then maybe even more so, because when I first saw them in Cuba, I kept expecting the the police to break in and bust it all up because I couldn't believe how subversive they were, you know, given the situation. But the energy, the urgency in their performance, you know, I mean, they don't have much, you know, but they have time and they put it all into their work, into the art. And when they perform, they don't get paid hardly anything. But man, it's what it's all about.
Mhm.
So
Here's a tough question that the committee members talk about among themselves very often. And that's this. And you've all eloquently spoken very nicely about what you consider to be excellent direction in a play. As you know, the Jeff Awards recognizes a play for best direction and also one for best production. And sometimes they're not for the same production. Does it make sense in some cases that they are not the same production, and why? Tough question, but it's one that we wrestle with all the time, and some of your ideas would be helpful.
Actually, my experience is that I guess I don't pay, maybe I've missed it, but
Yeah.
I've usually seen it where it is the same.
Okay. And it very often is, but sometimes it's not. And we wonder if it should be. Should it be the same production?
I don't know. Should is a thing that I try to get away from. So I don't know that there's a should. I think it needs to be the quality of the work.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think it needs to be focused on the quality of the work and something that just stands out.
Mhm.
Stands out.
All right.
I agree with you 100%. I do think it's worth asking yourself, if you think that this is the best production, why is it the best production? What is it that makes it the best production?
Mhm.
Yeah, but I
Criteria for that, right? Sorry.
Mhm. I agree.
What is the criteria? And I think, yeah, it's a tough question to answer to not knowing the criteria. I mean, I think it's an interesting question. If one thinks it is the best production,
Mm.
then why wouldn't it be the best direction? It's sort of, I don't know. I agree with the should or the would or
Right.
you know, it's a tough question.
As artists, we all want to grow. What have you learned about your craft since you first started that you maybe didn't know when you first started?
Well, but I still don't know everything.
Oh,
So say, yeah, I don't know that you ever stop learning.
I
never.
hope not.
Absolutely.
And I hope I don't. I mean,
Can you think of something that you have learned that you didn't realize when you first started?
I think I'm still learning,
Mhm.
that often the simplest choice is the best and it is the hardest to come to. So that I think that has been a big lesson for me over the years, and I'm still figuring that out, what that means. Simplicity and how you get there to tell that story.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. I think I've learned to trust that I don't have to have all the answers initially. That sometimes there's value in inviting your collaborators to present their ideas first
Mhm.
before I dictate my own ideas. I have learned that, and fairly recently actually, that if I open it up to my collaborators first, rather than coming into the first meeting and saying, here's what I think, here's what I think, saying instead from the get-go, what is this to you? What do you see? What do you envision? What does this play mean to you? I think it just creates a lot more possibilities and can be more enriching and more fun.
And more fun.
Before we close, you mind sharing with us now what you're doing now? In other words, are you in the process of directing a piece? Are you preparing to direct one? Do you have one in mind that you're going to direct soon? But where are you in the terms of the world of directing right now?
I'm in the process and trying to figure out where to get the joy of it, because it does feel difficult in this time when so many other things are present and top of mind for me. And but there's the excitement will come, but it's one of those that because we can't be in the room together, how to approach the work.
And without getting specific, have you cast the play already?
Casting it right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth and Henry, where are you? Are you?
I am in a very weird place, but we all are, I think. But yes, I am, I have productions that are tentatively scheduled for the future. And then I'm also really with a group of colleagues, we're really thinking about what it means to bring the theater to the public rather than expect the public to come to us, which actually is exactly what Henry's last piece, I think, was. And so we've been exploring ways in which to create theater that is appropriate in the times of COVID, but also addresses all of the other things that are happening in our world, and creates theater and storytelling that is much, much more accessible than I think it sometimes currently is. So we're think tanking.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, Luis Valdez said sometimes if the people can't come to the theater, you got to take the theater to the people, right?
Yeah.
Our little train, our mighty little train that could, Fannie Lou Hamer speak on it, is now Ife, Butler, and Felton offered, our musician, are in DC quarantining so that they can start performances next week with the arena. And it's weird not to be there with them, right? But they are totally, they're good. They're good to go. There are, I have several productions that are coming up, none of which have dates attached to them. Maybe one that does actually have a date to start rehearsal at the beginning of June in DC. We're determined to still do American Mariachi at the Goodman this year. We got as far as our final dress in Dallas at the Dallas Theater Center, March 13th, when we got sent home the next day. It was our final dress. So we're hoping, we're still determined to give it its life here.
Well, thank you. And I'm a man of my word. It is now 8 o'clock. So I do want to thank the three of you very much on behalf of the committee for taking the time to share your expertise and your views. It's always tough to get personal, but we appreciate you opening up and sharing your visions with us. And theater will return. So again, thank you very much. And you may leave us if you like. Michael, you can come back on. And maybe if you want to give the committee members a few minutes just to wave to each other or what have you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Great to see you guys.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
If you want to if you want to turn your camera on or turn your microphone on, that's fine. You should be able to do that.
And Michael, we don't want to take up too much of your time, but I think, maybe 5 or 10 minutes if people want to wave to each other. I'm not sure if they're there, but I did invite Richard Hessler and Jerry Prophet to partake today. So the panelists, you can leave us if you like. We're just going to say hello to each other. So again, thank you very
I don't
much.
see either of them there.
Bye, you guys.
Sure,
Stay
everyone.
well.
Live long and
Thank you.
Yes, be well. Be well.
Take care of
Thank
yourself.
you.
Thank you.